In this lecture, we are going to finish our discussion of colors by modifying borders. Most blocks support borders. By default, these blocks will disable border settings. Therefore, we need to take extra steps to enable this feature before changing the color. To get started, open the theme.json file. The settings for configuring borders can be tricky. The process is slightly different from other settings. First things first, we need to enable the border settings. We can enable borders through the settings object. Inside this object, add an object called border. Borders are more complicated than other properties. A border has a style, width, color, and radius. WordPress gives us the option of modifying all border properties. Alternatively, we can have partial support for borders. For example, let's enable all border settings. Inside the border object, add the following properties: color, radius, style, and width. The value for these properties is booleans. By default, they're all false. In our example, we're turning them on. Keep in mind, a block has to support border settings. Before testing our configuration, let's add some default styles for our borders. To mix things up, let's modify the border settings for the pull quote block. Scroll to the Styles section. Inside the Blocks object, we can add our block with the name core/pull quote. Next, we can add the border object to begin adding styles. As a reminder, we are modifying the styles. The options for styles are different than the options for changing the settings. We can't enable or disable the border settings from this object. The property names are going to be similar, but they require different values. If you want to enable border settings for a specific block, you must do it from the settings object. Inside the border object, we're going to modify all border styles. First, let's set the width property to 2px. Afterward, set the radius property to 10px. Next, set the style property to solid. Lastly, let's set the color property to the WP preset color U primary variable. As you can tell, the values for these properties must be valid CSS values. Time to test our code. In your browser, try adding the pull quote block to the template. After adding this block, our default stylings have been applied. If users don't like the styles, that's perfectly fine. The border settings are freely modifiable from the sidebar. By enabling all border settings, users can modify the width, color, style, and radius of a border. Finally, we're finished with the color settings. WordPress provides us with dozens of options for modifying the colors of a theme, from global level settings to block-specific settings. Hopefully, you will be able to leverage these options for your themes. Now that we've finished working with colors, let's move our discussion to typography settings.